Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into bustling taverns, royal feasts, and humble kitchens of medieval Europe, where people did not have refrigerators or fast food but survived on pottage, offal, and dishes more curious than comforting. Forget the glossy banquet scenes you see on television. The real story is about roasted swan served in its feathers, baked peacock filled with spices, and pies whose crusts were lined with gold leaf to show off wealth. So tonight we ask what odd foods medieval people actually ate, and why they thought such meals were healthy or fashionable. What did it feel like to swallow a cup of spiced worm stew or drink vinegar mixed with honey to aid digestion? Every bite reveals a window into daily life, from peasant porridge to kingly banquets. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see who's joining this journey into the strange appetites of a distant past. Now dim the lights, pull your blanket close, and let's taste the weird eating habits of medieval people together. You rise before dawn to stoke the fire in the village hearth. A cast iron cauldron hangs over the coals, its sides heavy with last night's residue. You gather water from the well and pour it into the pot. The first bubbles hiss against the cold metal, and you drop in a handful of oats. They float and swirl, soaking up water with quiet slurps. You stir slowly with a wooden spoon, watching as the grains swell and soften. In the garden, you harvest a few wilted greens, turnip tops or kale you rescued before frost. You rinse them at the trough and chop them coarsely, stems and leaves alike. You toss them into the cauldron and hear the water sigh as it warms. You dip a finger and taste. The oats have thickened the liquid into a murky broth. The greens add an earthy bite and a splash of colour. This is pottage, the heart of every peasant meal. It needs no potluck. Its strength comes from the slow simmer of simple things. Water oats, vegetables, scraps of meat or bone when you have them, and whatever herbs you can coax from the soil. You add a pinch of wild garlic, a few sprigs of parsley, or a handful of dried nettles. Each ingredient shapes the flavor and the memory of the land. Your neighbor arrives with a small joint of bacon, salted and hung from the rafters. You cut a sliver with care and drop it into the bubbling pottage. The fat melts and rises to the surface in golden ribbons. The aroma sharpens your appetite. You stir until the meat softens, then lower the heat so the fire can cool. You cover the cauldron with a lid to let the flavors mingle. Gruel is the other face of pottage. It is thinner, stretched with extra water for older folk or children with weak stomachs. You skim off the first ladle of thick porridge and set it aside. You pour extra water into the pot and stir until the consistency lightens. You taste the thin broth and add a spoonful of honey or a few raisins when they are in season. Gruel warms the body without overwhelming fragile digestion. By midday, the sun has climbed high, and the scent of pottage drifts through open doors. Children tumble into the yard, laughing at games of stick and hoop. They follow the smell and settle around the hearth, bowls in hand. You ladle out generous portions, watching the steam rise like ancient smoke. Each child stirs the pottage with a spoon, then lifts a spoonful to his lips. Their eyes widen at the warmth and comfort. They slurp small mouthfuls, cheeks full, jaws moving with quiet satisfaction. You offer a bowl to a weary traveler who has journeyed from the next village. He bows and accepts, blowing on the hot surface before tasting. His rough hands shake as he lowers the bowl to his lap. Each spoonful seems to restore strength to his limbs. He nods deeply at you, gratitude shining in his gaze. Peasants eat pottage at every meal. By midday, they simmer the pot again with fresh vegetables. On market day, they trade barley or beans for turnips or carrots to refresh their gruel. Even in lean seasons, they find roots in the forest, burdock nettles, dandelion greens, to feed the pottage its green heart. Meat is rare, reserved for festivals or Sunday dinners, but bones are plentiful. You crack marrow bones with a mallet and drop them in at the start. The broth grows rich with marrow and gives body to the dish. In the long winter months, you dry wild onions and garlic in the chimney alcove. You store them in clay jars to season pottage when fresh herbs cannot grow. You recall how the aroma of dried onion revived you on a cold morning. You remember how a spoonful of hot gruel sang down your throat and warmed every fibre of your being. Even the poorest cottage can boast pottage. A worn pot over a hearth is worth more than a heavy chain or a new tunic. Pottage sustains life. It mends stomachs. It warms bones. It binds the community. At mealtime, families gather, sitting on benches carved from logs. They dip their spoons and share the meal in silence or low conversation. They give thanks before eating, praising the earth, the water, the hands that grew the grain and tended the livestock. Then they eat. For travelers, it is a balm. A bed of oats and broth can heal a sore foot or a bruised heart. You see weary hands steady as a traveler lifts a bowl. You see eyes close in contentment. You see the power of simple nourishment working its magic. In the monastery nearby, the brothers refine pottage with garlic and leeks from their own garden. They add barley cooled in spring water and grate cheese into the stew. They serve it to pilgrims at the gate, offering sustenance for those who walked miles to seek solace in prayer. You taste their version and note the subtle tang of onion and the creaminess of cheese. It reflects their care and their vow of hospitality. You carry these memories to your own hearth. You teach a neighbor's wife how to stir without breaking the grains. You advise your mother on adding nettles for color and flavor. You swap stories of which root makes the broth sweeter or which herb banishes chill. You see the delight in each pot as families experiment and adapt. At Harvest Festival, you prepare a great cauldron of pottage in the village square. A dozen villagers stand with spoons and bowls, waiting. You ladle out generous portions garnished with fresh parsley. The crowd cheers and laughter fills the air. You realize that pottage is more than survival food. It is a celebration of shared abundance and the cycles of the earth. As dusk settles, you return to the hearth and wipe the last crumbs from your bowl. You feel gratitude for water, oats, and humble vegetables that grew in your own soil. You feel gratitude for the hands that tend the fields, the sheep, the chickens, and the neighbors who share their eggs and milk. You feel a quiet joy in knowing that even the simplest dish can bring comfort greater than any feast. You drift to sleep to the memory of bubbling cauldrons and the quiet clink of spoons. You dream of oats swelling in clear water and children's laughter echoing in twilight. You wake knowing that pottage and gruel are the bedrock of medieval living and testament to human ingenuity in turning grain and greens into warmth and health. You rise to tend the hearth once more, ready to feed body and soul with a dish as old as civilization itself. You finish your morning chores, then return to the hearth as the fire's embers glow red. A neighbor's son arrives, his sleeves torn and knees caked with mud. He carries a small sack of barley between his arms. He learned to gather barley from last autumn's harvest and dry it on his roof. Now he offers you the grain so you can make fresh pottage for his family. You pour the barley into a bowl and rinse it in cool water. Tiny stones and bits of chaff swirl away. You nod, and the boy runs off, pleased to have contributed. You lift the bowl and empty the clean grains into the cauldron. The stale oats from yesterday have become too soft, so you replace them with fresh barley this morning. You pour water to cover 3 fingers above the grain level and bring the pot to a simmer. While the barley cooks, you chop carrots and parsnips from the root cellar. You slice them thick, remembering how roots add sweetness and substance. You toss them into the bubbling broth. The kernels absorb water and swell, while the vegetables soften into bright chunks. You stir in a pinch of salt and a handful of dried nettles from last summer's harvest. The nettles enrich the green color and lend a mild bitterness that balances the sweetness of the root vegetables. By mid-morning, the pottage has thickened further. You taste it and add a drizzle of honey for the children. and a spoonful of rendered fat for the laborers. The melted fat floats on the surface in amber beads. The scent is rich and nourishing. You ladle servings into wooden bowls, lined along a long plank that serves as a communal table. Villagers gather with bowls and spoons. A woodcutter grips his bowl with one hand, his axe resting against his shoulder. He says that today's pottage has more color than usual, and that the barley cooks plump and tender. A seamstress tastes her stew and remarks that the carrots remind her of spring sunshine. You smile and pass another bowl to a traveling minstrel who tilts his head and hums a tune in approval before continuing his journey. You clean a spare bowl, then carry it to a nursing mother whose baby fusses for warmth. You dip the gruel into the bowl until it is thinner than the pottage served to laborers. You offer a spoon to the baby. He tastes the sweet liquid and quiets instantly. The mother thanks you, tears shining in her eyes. You feel pride in knowing that simple grains and water can bring comfort to the smallest and weakest. After the midday meal, you gather remaining pottage and distribute it among the elderly in thatch-roofed cottages. You fill clay pots and wrap them in linen. You carry them carefully through narrow lanes, pausing to greet neighbors who peer out of doorways. Each pot brings warmth to a hearth that might otherwise lie cold. You imagine the slow steam rising from each pot as the pottage simmers again on their hearths. Late in the afternoon, you meet with other cooks in the village square. They marvel at variations of pottage. One adds beans and leeks. Another stirs in wild mushrooms foraged from the forest. A third enriches the broth with fish from the river. You taste a spoonful of each, noting how beans lend fullness, mushrooms bring earthy depth, and fish bones add a savory tang. You return to your own cauldron to note these ideas for the next season. As the sun dips low, you carry a final pot of pottage to the roadside chapel. A traveling monk rings a small bell, calling the weary to share a meal. You ladle pottage into a common bowl and serve those who cannot tend hearths, beggars, travelers, and the sick. Each bowl is passed from hand to hand, and prayers of thanks rise with the steam. You stand in the circle and feel a quiet kinship with all who gather. When the last bowl is empty, you walk home under a sky painted by sunset. You pause by the river to listen to the water's steady flow. You taste the lingering sweetness of barley and honey in your mouth. You remember how pottage once meant survival, how it filled bellies when stores ran low, and how it warmed hearts on the coldest days. At your own hearth, you add the final pieces of charcoal to the fire and hang a pot of water to boil. You think of tomorrow's meal, perhaps pottage with beans or gruel for the children. You gather oats for drying and store roots for next season. You reflect on how each ingredient tells a story of fields and gardens, of hands that planted and tended the earth. You light a lantern and settle before the embers. You wrap a blanket around your shoulders and watch the flames dance. You feel gratitude for the humble pottage that nourishes your village. You understand that in a world without plenty, this simple dish binds community and gives strength to all who eat it. You drift to sleep with images of bubbling pots and shared bowls. You dream of barley fields waving in the breeze, and of families gathered around a common meal. You awaken with the urge to stir another pot, to feed another soul. You rise again with the knowledge that pottage and gruel are more than food. They are life's heart, pulsing with warmth and sustenance even in the poorest of times. You step into a warm kitchen where a heavy cauldron simmers above a wood fire. The scent of fresh herbs and spiced wine fills the air. A row of copper pots lines the wall, each containing cuts of meat you seldom see on a modern table. Your eyes settle on bowls of liver, kidneys, tongue, and heart waiting to be prepared. These offal cuts once fed entire feasts and were prized by cooks who knew how to turn strange bits into dishes that pleased both palate and purse. The cook lifts the lid on the first pot, and you see slices of beef liver soaking in red wine. He seasons them with chopped rosemary and crushed garlic, then slides them into the bubbling liquid. You hear the wine hiss as the liver absorbs its flavor and color. The cook stirs gently and tells you that liver is rich in nutrients and that this method tenderizes its chewy texture. He plates a small slice for you to taste. You lift it to your lips and take a bite. The wine lends sweetness, and the rosemary lends pine freshness. The liver melts on your tongue as if softened by magic. You close your eyes in surprise at how delicious this humble organ can be. Next, he drains the wine and sets the liver aside under a cloth to keep warm. He turns to a large pot of kidneys soaking in mild vinegar to remove harshness. He rinses the kidneys and tosses them into a pan of hot fat rendered from cured bacon. You watch as he sears the kidneys until they brown on every side. He strains off excess fat and adds a splash of white wine, parsley, and finely chopped onions. You inhale the savory aroma and feel your stomach settle for a proper meal. A neighbor drops by and tastes a slice, nodding as he places the tender kidney in his mouth. The cook grins and says that a few simple steps can transform the most feared offal into a feast. The cook next fetches a fresh tongue from a salted ham in the corner. He slips it into a pot of water, scented with bay leaves, black pepper, and coriander seeds. Over an hour, he simmers the tongue until it grows firm yet tender. You help peel away the tough skin, revealing pale pink flesh streaked with marbling. He slices the tongue thinly and dresses it with a shallot vinaigrette, lemon juice, and chopped tarragon. You taste the first piece and find its texture smooth and its flavor subtle, rich like the finest roast beef, but unexpectedly delicate. A local smith arrives to inspect the feast in progress. He watches you taste and chuckles at your delight. He says that in his childhood, peasants reserved tongue only for special occasions and that too much was wasted on burn victims. The cook laughs and offers him a slice. The smith wipes his mouth and toasts the cook with a tall mug of spiced ale. Next comes the heart. The cook cuts the thick muscle into steaks, a few fingers thick. He seasons them with salt, rosemary, and garlic, then layers them in a wide skillet, smoking with olive oil. You feel the sizzle as he lowers the heart steaks to the hot pan. He cooks them rare so they remain juicy and tender. You help arrange slices of roasted garlic atop the meat and sprinkle on thyme leaves. When the first heart steak is ready, you pick it up with careful fingers and taste. The flavor is bold, firm, and deeply meatier reminder that this organ powered every beat of life. You marvel that what once pumped blood through bodies now graces this table as a prized delicacy. The cook turns to a side table where jars of aromatic salts and peppercorns line up. He sprinkles a blend of smoked paprika, coriander, and fresh parsley over the liver and kidneys. He brushes the tongue with melted butter and a dusting of nutmeg. He sides the heart with roasted root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and onions. He invites you to plate a feast worthy of a lord yet born of simple ingredients. You fill your bowl with portions of each offal dish and lean over the cauldron to ladle stew into the empty spaces. The eaters gather around the kitchen table, farmers, artisans, a visiting priest, and a traveling minstrel. They wash their hands and pick up spoons, forks, and knives. The cook raises a mug of wine and toasts the odd meats before you. He says that offal nourishes both body and soul. You smile and raise your own mug in return. Spoons clink, forks tap plates, and laments of scarcity cease for a moment. You taste each dish in turn. The silky liver infused with wine, the kidney brightened by vinegar, the tender tongue laced with herbs, and the robust heart with its earnest flesh. You feel your bones warm and your mind clear. You savor not only flavor, but history of cooks who knew that no part of the beast was worthless. After supper, the cook brings out small plates of boiled tripe simmered in onion broth and offers you chunks smeared with parsley and salt. You wonder if you can manage another taste and find you still have room. You dip a piece of bread into the broth and nod in quiet approval. When the plates are empty, the table grows still. Each face bears contentment and a hint of surprise. You all lean back and rest hands on bellies. The cook washes the table with hot water and descends to store leftover offal in barrels of brine. He says that nothing goes to waste and that tomorrow the dishes will feed more mouths. You step outside into the cool evening air. A lantern hangs over the door and casts its glow onto the courtyard. You hear crickets and feel a gentle breeze rustle through the trees. You taste the remnants of feast on your lips and think of days when offal dinners brought communities together in celebrations of survival and ingenuity. You stroll home with a full belly and a new respect for medieval cooks. You realize that what we consider odd today was once a mark of resourcefulness. From farmers clearing fields to palace chefs designing banquets, organ meats held a place of honor. They satisfied hunger and curiosity alike. At your own hearth, you lay a small piece of salt pork salt plated in a simple bowl. You stir through the rice and lentils and add a swirl of oil. You think of the liver and kidneys and heart that shared your table. You understand that real nourishment comes from making the most of what is given. As you drift to sleep, you dream of simmering pots of offal stew steaming and fragrant. You hear voices around long wooden tables sharing stories of hunts and harvests. You feel the pulse of life feeding life in every bite. And you know that while modern plates may shy from offal, the heart of true cooking lies in using every part with care. In medieval kitchens, offal was not a last resort, but a centerpiece of flavor and tradition. You sleep with a full heart and resolve to honor that heritage by consuming offal boldly and gratefully. You sleep late, waking to the scent of smoke curling from nearby hearths. You join the cook in the courtyard where a large iron pot simmers over hot coals. Today's special is tripe and sweetbreads, organ meats prized in certain regions. The cook lifts the lid and the steam billows around you, carrying a creamy tang that hints at rich flavor and slow cooking. First, the cook ladles out pieces of tripe soaked overnight in vinegar and water to soften its strength. He rinses each strip at a stone trough, then drops them into the boiling stock. The pot is filled with onion, sage, and a handful of peppercorns harvested last autumn. You help stir the tripe gently, careful not to tear it. The tripe curls and twists in the liquid, its honeycomb texture taking on the broth's golden hue. While the tripe cooks, you see a basket of sweetbread's thymus glands from young calves soaked in salted milk. The cook drains them and tosses them in flour. He heats a skillet of lard and sears the sweetbreads until they turn golden brown. You watch them sizzle as he flips them, their delicate shape crisping at the edges. He adds a handful of fresh parsley and a spoonful of melted butter. The sweetbreads glisten and fill the air with a nutty aroma. You ladle tripe into bowls lined on a wooden table. Its creamy broth coats the spoon in a rich sheen. A shepherd tastes the stew and nods approval at the tender texture. He says that tripe used to be thrown away or fed to dogs until cooks learned its value. Now tripe stew is considered hearty fare for the strongest men in the parish. Next, the cook places sweetbreads on platters alongside pickled onions. You taste one from a nearby platter. It yields easily between teeth and melts into buttery warmth. The sweetness of the bread contrasts with the sharp bite of the onion. You scoop juicy onion rings into your stew bowl and blend the flavors. The cook smiles and says that pairing rich offal with tart pickles balances any heaviness in the meal. A local vintner arrives with a jug of bright white wine. He says that sweetbreads pair well with young wine to cleanse the palate. You pour a small cup and taste its crisp body against the sweetbread's richness. The flavor lifts, and you feel a glow from both wine and meal. A traveler from a distant abbey stops for a taste. He carries a hollowed gourd filled with fermented goat's milk. He dips his spoon into the tripe broth and tastes it. He closes his eyes in satisfaction and shares a sip of his curdled milk. The tang of the milk complements the earthy tripe. He calls it a perfect match and offers you a share. In the shade of an elm tree, you see a shepherd's wife stirring a pot of brains. Yes, brains. Calf brains simmer in milk seasoned with nutmeg and sage. She dips a spoon to taste. You watch her face light with pleasure. You ask if you can try. She hands you a small square of cradled brain pressed onto a toasted slice of barley bread. You taste the creamy interior and taste hints of spice and milk. The texture is unlike anything you have eaten, soft and sumptuous. You wonder why brains are not more common in modern kitchens. The shepherd's wife explains that brains were once served at harvest feast, before the meat was butchered for salting and preserving. They were considered a special dish for guests and harvesters who worked long days. You nod, understanding that organ meats connected people to the cycles of life and land. You return to the cook's cauldron, where the broth is nearly gone. The last strips of tripe swirl beneath the surface. You dip your bowl for another serving and catch the eye of a young squire. He stands near a spit, turning a pig's head. Yes, the head, cooked whole with crusted skin and roasted ears. He pulls a slice from the cheek and offers it to you. The meat is sweet and gelatinous. You taste it and feel the crackle of fatty skin. He smiles and says that eating the head honors the animal by ensuring nothing is wasted. Nearby, a group of women prepares a sweet porridge of rice and almonds. No organ meats here, but they call it a palate cleanser. They offer bowls of this porridge at the end of the offal feast to calm the stomach and soothe the spirit. You take a spoonful and feel the cool sweetness drift through your belly. They laugh and nod at the ritual. The porridge tastes of saffron and hunya, reminder that even the humblest meal can end on a note of luxury. As afternoon drifts toward evening, the courtyard empties. You help gather copper pots for cleaning. You scrape off bits of onion peel and fat. You rinse each vessel in clear water until it shines. The cook wraps leftover sweetbreads and tripe in linen for his family's supper. He tucks the salted pig's head toward the back for his children to share later. You lean on a table and wearily watch him hang pots to dry. You feel pride in the feast you helped create. You think of how every part of the beast was honored, from the liver and kidneys to the tongue and heart, to now the sweetbreads and brains. You understand that medieval cooks transformed necessity into delicacy. Their creativity filled bellies and bound communities across fields and towns. That evening you stroll through the village square where lanterns glow. You smell smoke and spices drifting from street stalls. A traveling cook names offal dishes in the local tongue. Bacon and onions boiled in wine liver slices, with sage fried in butter and kidney pie baked in coarse pastry. Children watch wide-eyed as the cook flips a skillet and ladles the dishes onto wooden plates. You wander home under a lamplit sky. You hear a fiddle tune from the tavern where peasants feast on hearts skewered and braised with pepper and thyme. You see a blacksmith wipe his hands on a cloth and say that even the toughest men need organ meats to fuel their strength. At your own hearth, you place a small pan of bacon and onions on the embers. You invite a neighbor in and share a modest meal. You toast ancient cooks who turned offal into feasts. You taste the smoky bacon, crisp at the edges, and the soft onions simmered sweet. You remember the liver, kidneys, tongue, heart, sweetbreads, brains, and tripe you encountered. You feel gratitude for a world that honored every part of the animal. You sleep with a full belly and a curious respect for the unusual delights of medieval tables. You arrive at the coastal smokehouse, just as dawn light glints off the sea. A long wooden rack stands beneath an open shed roof. On it hang dozens of herring, their bodies stiff and silvery. The smoke curls from a fire pit of oak and applewood logs. The air smells of wood and salt and something faintly sweet from wood tar. A master preserver greets you and hands you a clean cloth. He motions you closer to the smoking rack so you can feel the heat. He explains that salted herring was a staple for life at sea and in towns far from fresh fish. The fish were gutted and split open, then rubbed with coarse salt before being laid on racks. They remain there for days, drawing out moisture while the smoke and salt lock in preservation. You watch as wisps of blue smoke drift through the silvery bodies. The process transforms fresh fish into morsels that travel by barrel or crate across land and sea. You follow the preserver to a stone table where barrels stand open. He pours brine made from sea salt and water into the first barrel. Then he layers herring in neat rows. Between each layer, he sprinkles juniper berries and crushed peppercorns. The spices add flavor and repel insects. He covers the last layer with more brine and seals the barrel with a wooden lid. You lift the lid and see the fish immersed in flavorful liquid. The master explains that after weeks in brine, the herring are firm, pungent, and ready to eat without cooking. They will be shipped to inland villages where fish is rare and prized. Next, you visit the salmon smokehouse. The walls are lined with cedar boards blackened by years of smoke. Salmon fillets hang by strips of leather from beams overhead. The preserver lights the kiln beneath them. The fire crackles against stones. You feel warmth and hear the hush of air moving through the kiln's vents. The salmon's flesh turns deep orange as it cures. You touch a fillet gently and feel its firm texture. The aroma is rich, smoky, and slightly sweet. This smoked salmon will be sliced thin and served at feasts or tucked into traders' packs for journeys south. The preserver hands you a sample. You taste a thin slice. Its flavor is intense, yet delicate. You taste the memory of river waters, the smoke of oak wood, and the faint sweetness of fat. You nod as the preserver smiles. He says that no banquet is complete without smoked fish, especially at winter festivals when fresh meat is scarce. You follow him to a courtyard where venison haunches hang from hooks. He points to native spices in clay pots: coriander seeds, caraway, mustard, and crushed rosemary. He works a cut of venison in a brine of salt, wine, and spices for a day. Then the meat is hung to dry or packed in barrels with layers of salt and aromatic herbs. You help roll a slab of meat in spice rubs. You feel the coarse mixture cling to flesh. The preserver winds strips of linen around the meat and ties it tightly with twine. He says that in this form the meat will keep for months, as long as barrels remain sealed and cool. You taste a thin slice of dried venison. Its flavor is strong, gamey, with pepper and rosemary brightening each bite. You see why travelers prized salted venison. It was survival food and delicacy alike. A group of merchants arrives to load barrels onto wagons. They strap wooden crates full of smoked salmon and salted herring next to barrels of venison. You help lift a barrel and feel its weight. You imagine the journey ahead, over mountains, through forests, along rivers, to markets where these preserved foods command high price. In the afternoon, you escort a cart to a remote village. The preserved fish and spiced meats will supply the community through winter. Children follow your cart, eager for a taste of the sea and forest. You distribute small pieces of dried venison and salted herring, their eyes light at the new flavors. A grandmother smiles as she cradles a herring and tears off a morsel. You feel satisfaction in knowing that this ancient practice of salting and smoking keeps bodies nourished when fresh food is gone. Back at the smokehouses, you help stoke the fires and prepare barrels for the next season's catch. You stack coopered rings and oak staves. You seal one new barrel and listen as the lid taps against the wood side in a hollow warning. You learn that proper sealing prevents flies and bacteria from spoiling the meat. You feel respect for the craftsmen who made barrels that would cross the world. As dusk falls, you walk the shoreline. The wind carries smoke and salt. You taste the briny air and think of how people of old survived long winters and sea voyages on preserved fish and spiced meats. You recall how salted herring sustained soldiers, how smoked salmon delighted nobles, how spiced venison brought communities together at feast. Returning home, you carry a small pouch of crushed spices in your coat pocket. You knee a piece of dried venison in a bowl of hot barley gruel. The meat softens and flavors the broth. You taste the comforting blend of game and grain. You know that living without refrigeration forced medieval cooks to master the art of preservation. They turned simple ingredients into durable staples that fueled armies and filled bellies across kingdoms. That night you drift to sleep with the image of dangling fish and hanging haunches in your mind. You hear the crackle of fires and the soft drip of brine. You feel gratitude for the skills that kept people alive and festive in times of scarcity. You wake with a deeper understanding of how salt, wood, and spice shaped diets and economies for centuries. You rise before dawn once more, ready to stoke fires and fill barrels in the pursuit of preservation. Your hands know the weight of smoked salmon and the bite of dried venison. Your nose remembers the scent of herring brine and spice rub. You carry forward the legacy of spiced meat and preserved fish, a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the flavors that bound communities in a distant past. You wake with the taste of brine on your tongue and head to the fish press beside the quay. The wooden frame stands over a stone slab streaked with salt water. Barrels of herring and salmon sit ready for the next stage of preservation. The master preserver greets you and hands you a pair of thick gloves. He explains that today you will learn how to cure fish in dry salt rather than brine. He dumps a bucket of coarse salt onto the slab, spreading it in an even layer. Then he tilts a barrel of herring over the salt bed and rolls the fish gently so each one is coated. You help tuck the salted herring into clay jars lined with more salt, layering fish and seasoning black peppercorns, crushed coarse, bay leaves and sprigs of thyme. When the jar is full, you cap it tightly and store it in a cool, dark cellar. The herring will lose moisture gradually and cure without liquid. The result is firm and flavorful fish that will last for months. Next, the preserver demonstrates smoking sprats from the nightly catch. He lights a small coil of green alder branches in a shallow pit on the floor of the smokehouse. The wood smolders, producing thick, sweet smoke. He lays sprats on woven racks close to the ceiling, then closes the doors and vents. You step inside for a moment and breathe the heavy air. The smoke coats the fish and seeps into every crevice of their flesh. In several hours, they will be lightly smoked and ready to pack into barrels or woven baskets lined with straw to be sold at market. You move on to beef jerky. The preserver brings out strips of lean venison from the earlier salting process. You hang them on wooden rods over a low fire of oak wood chips lightly scented with rosemary. The strips must dry slowly without cooking. You kneel to stoke the coals and fan the smoke so it drifts evenly across the meat. The air fills with the smoky aroma that you know means long-lasting protein for travelers and hunters. A butcher's apprentice arrives with venison loins that he wants to cure for his master's household. The preserver rubs the meat with salt, crushed coriander, and mustard seeds. Then he wraps each loin in cheesecloth soaked in white wine. He says that the wine adds flavor and helps draw salt deeper into the meat. You help tie the bundles with string and hang them in the cool pantry. In a fortnight, they will be firm and richly seasoned slices, worthy of noble tables. By midday, you assist in preparing spiced sausages. The preserver mixes ground pork with finely chopped onions, sage, and marjoram. He seasons the mix with salt, pepper, and a pinch of clove. You help stuff the blend into cleaned intestines, twisting links at regular intervals. Then he hangs the sausages to air dry for a day before smoking them over beech logs. The result is sausage rich with herbs and smoky sweetness. When cooked, they fill huts and halls with savory warmth. A traveling merchant stops by to trade for a barrel of salted fish. He carries spices from the east, cinnamon, cassia, and saffron. He offers 1 spoon of saffron for a barrel of herring. The preserver agrees. You help weigh out saffron threads on a simple set of scales and drop them into the brine. The red threads bloom in the brine and tint the herring with golden hue. The merchant nods and wraps his payment in cloth. You watch him mount his mule and ride off, saffron and salt bound together across dusty roads. In the afternoon, you gather stray scraps of salt meat left on benches. You place them in a stew pot with leeks, carrots, and barley. The pot simmers gently, releasing a savory aroma that draws passers-by to the door. You ladle servings into bowls and share the meat stew with harvesters who spent the morning in the fields. They pause in their work to eat, praising the hearty stew that repurposes every bit of cured meat. As dusk approaches, you return to the smokehouse. The sprats are lightly smoked and ready to be packed. You help remove them carefully and wrap them in clean linen. The preserver loads them into baskets for transport to the fishmonger in town. You smell the smoke on your hands and think of fish markets filled with customers seeking the fresh taste of the sea even in winter. Back in the village, you deliver a basket of spiced sausages and smoked sprats to the local inn. The innkeeper greets you and offers a stein of ale in payment. He hangs the sausages above the hearth and piles sprats on platters. You watch as travelers and locals settle in for supper, drawing plates heaped with smoked fish and meat. The crackle of the fire and aroma of spices fill the room. You feel satisfaction in knowing that these preserved foods bring comfort even miles from the coast. That night you sit by your own hearth and unwrap a small wedge of dried venison cured in wine and herbs. You slice it thin and taste the concentrated flavor of fields and forests. You follow with a piece of smoked herring, its flesh firm and salty. You sip a mug of warm ale and close your eyes in contentment. You remember the care taken with salt, smoke, and spice. You recall how the preserver tended each fish and cut of meat as if it were treasure. You feel gratitude for a time when preservation meant survival and creativity turned simple ingredients into feasts. As you drift to sleep, you dream of barrels heaped with herring jars brimming with sausages and smokehouses hanging, heavy with fish. You dream of the ancient craft of curing and how it carried the taste of home across oceans and deserts. You wake, knowing that salt and smoke and spice are more than flavors. They are history sealed in every bite and a testament to human ingenuity across the centuries. You step into the grand kitchen of the Lord's Manor, where torches flicker against stone walls and the air hums with anticipation. Long oak tables stand ready, boards polished by countless feasts. A team of cooks moves in practiced rhythm. In one corner, a basin holds live peacocks, their feathers trimmed with care. Nearby swans lie on ice beds alongside cranes and herons brought by falconers from distant marshes. These creatures are prized not for their flesh, but for their spectacle. Tonight, they will be transformed into royal showpieces baked under golden pastry. You approach a massive wooden table covered in flour. A master cook lifts a swan by its legs and lays it breast up. He seasons the cavity with salt and crushed herbs, thyme, rosemary, and bay leaves from the monastery gardens. He tosses in a handful of currants and chopped almonds. You watch as he slides his hand into the bird and tucks spiced apples and slices of orange into every crevice. He sprinkles saffron threads for color and warm aroma. Then he wraps the swan in layers of pastry made from fine white flour, butter, and egg. You help roll out the dough with a long wooden pin, guiding it around the bird like a cocoon. The cook smooths every seam and uses a small knife to score decorative patterns that will glint in the firelight. Next comes the peacock. Its feathers have been removed, but its tailbones remain electronically arranged so that when the pastry is removed at the table, the plumage can be reattached for a stunning reveal. The cook lays the peacock on a bed of parsley and juniper branches. He glazes the skin with honey to add shine. You brush the thin dough sheet across the bird's back, leaving space around the rib cage to allow air to circulate. The cook presses small pastry feathers into the dough, creating a pattern that mimics the bird's tail. You stand back as he seals the edges and transfers the peacock to a great iron pan. A crane follows, its long legs trimmed to fit within the pastry border. The cook fills its cavity with spices mixed with wild rice and dried cherries. You place the rice mixture inside and help tie its legs together with string so the shape remains elegant. The pastry covers the crane in smooth curves. The cook marks its wings with fine slashes and sets it beside the swan in the hearth. Finally, the heron. Its thin bones require careful handling. The cook wraps slices of bacon around the heron's breast to keep it moist. You help brush melted butter over the pastry, so it will brown evenly. The master cook steps back and nods. He slides each bird into the roaring oven, their golden forms disappearing into the heat. While the birds bake, you place platters of garnishes on the sideboard. You carve turnips into roses and arrange clusters of grapes. You fill bowls with dried figs and dates soaked in wine. You bring trays of crisp lettuce leaves and drizzles of vinegar from barrels of pickled herbs. Each platter complements the show of flesh to come. In the great hall, guests gather at long candlelit tables. Nobles and knights settle into carved wooden chairs. They wear fine silks embroidered with gold. Minstrels play soft melodies on lutes and harps. The lord of the manor stands to speak of harvest and fortune, then nods to his steward. You watch as the steward signals cooks in the kitchen. Moments later, doors swing open, and the steward leads a procession of cooks carrying covered dishes. You follow, carrying a final platter of fresh herbs. The cooks enter in 2 lines. They place the covered pans before the guests in silent ceremony. The lord raises his goblet and gestures for the covers to be removed. At once, the hall gasps. The swan's pastry shell slides away to reveal tender white meat glistening in a pool of saffron sauce. The peacock's tail feathers reappear, fanning above the bird as if alive again. The crane and heron stand in their pastry shells like sculptures of flesh. Candles flicker against the gold of crusts and the vibrant hues of feathers restored for a moment of wonder. You stand at the head of the table, smoothing a cloth for the lord. He picks up his carving knife and slices into the swan's breast. The meat parts with ease. He offers you a taste. You accept a small piece and let it melt on your tongue. The bird tastes rich and sweet, infused with citrus and wine. You feel exhilaration and pride. You helped turn wildfowl into a spectacle fit for royalty. Knights lean forward to taste the peacock. The flesh is firm and subtly gamey. They marvel at the blend of sweet honey glaze and savory herbs. Courtiers sprinkle juice from the crust onto their bread. Laughter and conversation fill the hall. You see children's eyes wide with delight as the peacock's tail glitters in the candlelight. After the meat is carved, the crusts are served too. Guests nibble at crisp pastry flecks, savoring the buttery flakes and lingering spices. The steward brings platters of pear compote and rosewater pudding for a final flourish. You step back to the shadows and watch the feast unfold. You taste the wine that flowed freely. You hear minstrels strike a brisker tune. You feel the warmth of the hearth and the hum of satisfaction. Later, you return to the empty kitchen. The fire has died low. The racks are empty. You wipe sooty walls and sweep scraps into a trough. You stack carved bones beside the sink. The cook and his helpers wash pots and pans in fragrant herb water. You help carry ashes to the courtyard for the night. As you leave, you pause and taste the air. You remember the complex flavors of swan and peacock, the firm bite of crane, and the gentle sweetness of heron. You marvel at how cooks used pastry and spice to transform wild birds into symbols of wealth and hospitality. At home, you carve a simple roast chicken for your family. You season it with thyme and butter and roast it in the hearth. You taste its flesh and smile. You think of exotic fowl baked under gold pastry and realize that celebration need not depend on rarity. Even the humblest bird can bring joy when prepared with care and imagination. You drift to sleep hearing echoes of laughter and candlelight. You dream of elaborate feasts and endless tables. You wake to the dawn and ready yourself for another day of simple pleasures and extraordinary possibilities. You carry with you the memory of exotic birds and royal fowl, proof that cuisine can elevate even the wildest of creatures into art. You wake before sunrise. eager to continue the feast preparations for the traveling nobles. The kitchen yard is already alive with the crackle of small fires and the chatter of apprentices. The cook greets you and points to a row of empty carving slates laid out on a long trestle bench. Each slate will hold a different bird, trimmed and decorated for presentation. First, you carry in a pair of cooked swans, still wrapped in their golden pastry. The cook carefully lifts the crust and layers the meat atop the carving stone. He uses a slender knife to slice the breast meat into even medallions. You help transfer the slices onto fresh platters, lined with crisp lettuce leaves and garnished with sprigs of rosemary. The pale glimmer of swan flesh contrasts with the deep green of the greenery. Next, you bring forward the peacock. Its plumage has been removed and saved, but the cook reattaches the magnificent tail feathers to the platter behind the sliced meat. You hold the feathers upright, while the cook lays out thin slices of breast in overlapping rows. He dots each slice with tiny blossoms of violet and rose petal jam. The petals glisten like jewels against the white meat. You stand back, while he ties a small ribbon of parsley around the bird's leg bones to add a flourish of color. A line of guests streams into the hall. They pause at the doorway to admire the peacock array. A noblewoman gasps and tucks a hand under her chin. A lord stoops to inspect the petals. You watch their faces light with delight and realize that the spectacle of color matters as much as the taste of the flesh. The cook turns to the cranes next. He brings in the crane wrapped in pastry. You help peel away the crust and gently slide the meat onto a slate. The meat is firm and pink. He chops it into bite-sized cubes and tosses them with a drizzle of rich gravy spiced with cloves and cinnamon. He arranges the cubes in a neat pile beside a nest of sautéed wild mushrooms. You add a handful of wood sorrel leaves to lend citrus notes. The guests lean forward to sample. They taste the spiced meat, then close their eyes in appreciation. One man nods and says it reminds him of game roasted by his grandfather near a forest fire. Finally, the heron is brought in. Its plush skin removed, the cook retrieves the tender breast meat and lays it on a slate beside ribbons of pickled onion and cucumber slices. He sprinkles a dusting of toasted sunflower seeds for crunch. You help place a sprig of dill atop the stack. The heron tastes mild and watery, but the pickles sharpen the palate. A minstrel plucks a chord on a lyre as a guest eats, as if celebrating the harmony of flavors. As the birds are devoured, you clear the slates and replace them with bowls of boiled greens, lightly seasoned with garlic and butter. You add platters of roasted root vegetables and sweet fruits to cleanse the palate. A row of sweet tarts baked with honey and rose petals concludes the banquet. In the aftermath, you help wash dozens of plates and slates in warm water, scented with vinegar and rosemary. The cook and apprentices peel pastry scraps and rescue edible bits for tomorrow's soup. They praise your steady hands and quick work. Later, you wander the courtyard where the remnants of the feast gather in wheelbarrows bound for the poor. Children laugh as they taste scraps of pastry and meat. You feel warmth at your chest. You remember how exotic creatures once fed the privileged but now bring joy to all. As dusk falls, you climb the stairs to the roof terrace. You look out over the fields and distant woods. The wind carries a hint of wood smoke and harvest hay. You taste the memory of swan and peacock and crane and heron. You taste the flavors of a world where celebration demanded creativity and feasting brought communities together. You descend to your own hearth and carve a small pheasant you purchased at market. You stuff it with herbs and roast it slowly by candlelight. You taste its flesh and smile. A simple bird, no tail feathers, no pastry crust, yet its taste reminds you of yesterday's feast. You share it with a friend and raise a cup of spiced wine in a quiet toast to wildfowl and royal traditions. That night you drift to sleep with sounds of distant music and dreams of vibrant plumage and glittering halls. You wake refreshed by memory of color and flavor united in a single table. You carry forward the lesson that the most exotic feast begins not with wealth but with imagination and a loving hand shaping food into wonder. You step through the arched doorway into the monastery's kitchen and are greeted by the gentle scent of flowers and simmering sugar. Light filters through a high window and illuminates wooden shelves lined with jars of rose petals, pansies, violets, and pomegranate seeds. An elderly monk in a simple robe beckons you forward. He says that this hall once echoed with chants and now echoes with the bubbling of sweet concoctions meant to heal both body and spirit. He leads you to a long work table covered in marble. On one end lie roses freshly picked from the cloister garden. Their petals are soft and deep pink. He shows you how to separate the petals from the green calyx and rinse them in cold spring water. You watch as he places them in a large copper pot with just enough water to cover. He taps a few drops of lemon juice into the pot to preserve color and then brings it to a gentle simmer. The petals release their fragrance and the water turns a pale blush. Next, he measures cane sugar by weight and adds it slowly to the rose water, stirring until each crystal dissolves. The mixture thickens and glistens as the sugar and floral essence intertwine. He tastes a drop and nods. You taste as well and find the flavor both delicate and rich. He removes the pot from heat and lets it cool slightly. Then he ladles the rose petal jam into clean jars, capping each one carefully. He explains that this jam soothes sore throats and lifts the heart when sadness weighs heavy. Pilgrims who once journeyed to distant shrines carried small jars of rose jam to sweeten long walks and find comfort on lonely nights. While the rose jam cools, you follow the monk to another table where pansies and violets lie in baskets. He picks a handful of violet blooms and crushes them gently between his fingers. The petals stain his fingers violet. He pours simple syrup into a shallow pan over low fire. When the syrup simmers, he scatters the petals onto the surface. They bob gently and darken the liquid. You watch as he uses a slotted spoon to lift each petal and roll it in sugar. The sugar crystallizes on the flower, preserving it like a tiny jewel. He places each sugared violet onto a parchment sheet to dry. You taste one and feel a burst of honeyed floral sweetness. He says these flower candies brighten tea and offer cheer to anyone who tastes them. Next, the monk takes you to a corner where pomegranates are stacked in wooden bowls. He cuts one in half and shakes the seeds into a large bowl. The gems tumble out, glistening in the torchlight. He gathers the seeds in his hand and lets the juice drip back onto them. Then he transfers the seeds into a fine mesh strainer and squeezes out the ruby juice. You taste the juice and feel its tart sweetness awaken every sense. He returns to the copper pot and pours in the pomegranate juice. He adds sugar and a dash of water and brings it to a slow boil. He skims off foam as the mixture reduces to a thick syrup. Then he removes it from heat and stirs in a handful of rose petals for color and scent. He pours the pomegranate jelly into small clay dishes and covers each dish with a cloth to cool. The jelly firms into a rich red gel that holds its shape. He offers you a spoonful. The taste is vibrant and tangy, a perfect counterpoint to the richer rose jam. While the jellies set, the monk shows you a third preparation. He pours honey into another pot and warms it gently. Then, he sprinkles in dried lavender buds and crushed mint leaves. You breathe deeply as the blossoms infuse the honey with subtle minty lavender fragrance. He filters the honey through cheesecloth and pours it into bottles. He says that infused honey is a simple elixir for coughs and sleepless nights. Across the workroom, novices carefully wrap rose jam jars in linen and write labels with quill and ink. They tie the jars with colored thread and place them on shelves. Other novices dust powdered sugar onto stacks of violet candies and seal the pomegranate jellies in gilded wooden boxes for travelers. You join them in labeling and feel the rhythm of centuries of tradition in your hands. The monk speaks softly of how these sweet remedies nourish more than the body. They comfort emotions, bind communities, and connect the living to the cycles of nature. When winter's frost kills fresh greens, these preserved blossoms remind people of spring's promise. Pilgrims far from home carry violet candies and rose jam to recall gardens left behind. You watch as the final pots are washed and the floor swept. The workroom grows quiet, except for the hiss of embers in the hearth. You wipe your hands and taste a drop of rose jam saved in your palm. The soft sweetness lingers as you step back into the cloister's cool corridors. That evening you walk through the garden where moonlight reveals petals under dew. You pick a single rose and carry it to the chapel steps. You place the rose beside a candle and whisper a prayer of thanks for healing found in sweetness. You taste the air and feel gratitude for the strange alchemy that turns petals into remedy. Back at home you lay out small plates of violet candies, rose jam on crusty bread, and pomegranate jelly. You share them with friends by candlelight. As laughter rises, you see how simple sweets can bring joy where heavy worries once sat. You realize that these flour confections and herb jellies were early medicine and magic woven together. You drift to sleep with violet candied petals on your pillow and dream of monasteries filled with flowers and light. You dream of copper pots simmering late into night and novices humming as they stir sweet pots. You wake with a sweet taste on your tongue and a sense of wonder that medieval kitchens could hold both science and poetry in every scoop of jam and drop of jelly. You return to the monastery kitchen at first light, drawn by the scent of drying petals and simmering sugar. Novices sweep the floors, while others tie bundles of fresh lavender and mint for next season's jellies. The master monk greets you and leads you to a long plank covered in blotting paper. On it lie dozens of flower confections, candied pansies, sugar-coated violets, crystallized rosebuds, and tiny bits of calendula petals dipped in syrup. Their colors glow under the torches, each blossom a jewel. Today the monk will prepare gift boxes for pilgrims who seek sweet relief on their journeys. He shows you small wooden boxes lined with soft linen. First, you carefully pick up a violet candy with tweezers and place it in a corner of the box. The petals are delicate but sturdy from the crystallization process. You work methodically until each box holds a dozen candies, 2 of each flower, arranged like a mosaic. The monks believe that sharing these confections carries the garden's blessing to distant lands. Next, you fill small glass jars with rose petal jam. You stir each jar to settle the petals evenly. The deep pink jam glitters like liquid dawn. You seal the jars with wax and wrap them in reeds tied with colored thread. Each package bears a simple label in Latin, marking the feast day or saint to whom it was dedicated. These jars will travel with pilgrims to provide comfort during long days on the road. A group of visitors arrives bearing letters of introduction. They seek remedies for sleeplessness and anxiety. The monk dips cloth sachets into lavender honey and hands them out. He instructs the visitors to carry the sachets in their pockets or hang them by their pillows. The lavender scent will bring calm to restless minds and gentle dreams. You watch as the visitors inhale the floral aroma and relax the tension from their shoulders. They bow deeply and express their gratitude. Meanwhile, a traveling merchant displays pomegranate jelly embossed with monastic seal. He pours a small dish for you to taste. The jewel-red jelly holds plump seeds that crack with bright juice. You taste the tart sweetness and feel an energetic lift, as though the fruit's memory of summer ripeness brings warmth to your core. The merchant explains that pomegranate seed jelly was once served at winter solstice feasts and believed to guard against illness in the dark months. You admire the idea that a simple jelly can carry the warmth of a forgotten season. In the courtyard, you help novices collect rose hips from wild bushes. The monk instructs you to separate the seeds from the flesh and dry the outer pulp on racks. Once dried, they will be ground for tea that soothes coughs and strengthens immunity. You remember how the rose hip tea steamed warmly in your mother's cup and eased your sore throat as a child. Even now you feel those memories bloom in your chest. Back inside you, knead dough for sweet pastry shells. You roll it thin and cut rounds that will hold flour confections or jam. You place a scoop of violet candy and a dollop of rose jam into each pastry. You fold the edges like petals and brush the tops with egg wash. The pastries bake quickly, filling the kitchen with sweet perfume. When they come out golden, you place them on trays and carry them to the refectory where monks and lay sisters gather for midday prayers and a shared meal. In the refectory, you serve the pastries with a ladle of honey lavender tea. The sisters bless the offering and pass plates from hand to hand. As you watch them break the pastries apart and taste each bite, you feel the full circle of your work, from garden to kitchen to shared table. The sweetness brings smiles and a moment of peace in the bustle of monastic life. That afternoon, you help prepare pomegranate jelly cakes for a visiting noblewoman. Her lady-in-waiting brings fine fluted molds and a silver spoon. You pour warm jelly into the molds and let it set in the shade. When the jelly firms, you unmold each cake onto a silver platter. The noblewoman inspects the cakes and nods with approval. She offers you a piece of her own sugar-spun pastry in return, a rare and delightful exchange between humble monk and aristocrat. As evening falls, you gather the last petals for tomorrow's rosewater distillation. Under the guidance of the Salarius, you fill a copper still with petal layers and pure water. You seal it and bring it to a slow simmer. You know the first drops of rosewater will distill into a separate vessel, carrying the unspoken power of the monastery's gardens. This rosewater will become a base for ointments and a tonic for weary travelers. By nightfall, the workroom quiets. You help sweep the floors and carry used pans to the hearth for washing. You fold the linen wraps and stack jars neatly. The lanterns burn low as you retrieve a small silk pouch filled with sugared rose petals for your own pillow. You tuck it beneath your arm as a promise of calm dreams. Outside the cloister gates, you pause and breathe in the evening air. The scent of lavender and mint lingers on your skin, mingling with distant breeze from the hills. You taste the memories of blossoms in every breath. You recall pilgrims carrying pastries and jellies across rough roads with hope in their hearts. You walk home through moonlit fields. You think of how flowers that once nodded in spring become sweet treasures in winter and beyond. You dream of sharing violet candies with friends and of spooning pomegranate jelly into cups of spiced wine at the next festival. At home, you fill a small bowl with violet candies and share them with your family by firelight. You offer rose petal jam on slices of fresh bread. You taste each bite and think of the hands that tended gardens of healing and sweetness. You feel gratitude for living in a world where such simple wonders bring joy, comfort, and the promise of dawn in every petal's sugar coat. You wake to a chill in the air and the sound of pots rattling in the street below. Winter has settled over the village, and the world feels locked in frost. You pull on a wool cloak and make your way to the tavern on the corner where a large iron cauldron hangs over a roaring fire. The tavern keeper greets you with a nod and offers you a wooden mug. Inside the mug is steaming mulled wine, spiced with cinnamon cloves and a twist of orange peel. The steam curls around your face and warms your cheeks. You lift the mug and inhale the heady aroma. Each breath fills you with warmth and promise. The tavern keeper explains that mulled wine was more than comfort in cold months. He says it carried health in each sip. The spices warmed the body and drove out chill. The wine carried antiseptic properties that helped stave off coughs and colds. He adds a spoonful of honey to sweeten the cup, then slides the mug across the bar. You taste a sip and let it rest on your tongue. The sweetness from the honey coats your throat, and the wine's warmth spreads through your chest. The cinnamon stings gently, and the cloves linger on your breath. You nod in appreciation and settle by the hearth to finish the brew. Across the room, a traveller stirs a pot of mulled mead. The honey wine glows pale gold. He scoops a ladleful into a small bowl and tosses in crushed ginger and a pinch of nutmeg. He offers you a taste. You lean forward and sip. The ginger tickles your tongue, and the nutmeg's warmth dances at the back of your throat. The mead feels thicker than wine, richer and more fragrant. The traveler says that mead was brewed long ago by monks who believed honey carried the sun's power and cured fevers and fatigue. You consider the legacy of honey and wine working together to heal and lift spirits. At the opposite end of the tavern, a group of villagers gathers around a table laden with small glasses of cordial. The cordial glimmers amber, and they pass the glasses from hand to hand. You join them and receive a shot of rose-hip cordial, steeped in haws and ginger root. You raise the glass in a toast and swallow. The tart sweetness fills your senses, and the ginger brings a bite of fire. The villagers nod and speak of coughs eased and stomachs soothed. You learn that cordials were prized remedies for colic and indigestion. A spoonful after a heavy meal would chase away cramps and heartburn. The tavern keeper shows you another battery of cordials. One is flavored with juniper berries and will guard against chills. Another is infused with thyme and honey for sore throats. A third carries orange peel and mint to refresh the mind when fatigue sets in. You taste each one and note how each blend carries both flavor and purpose. The tavern keeper says that a well-stocked apothecary or kitchen always kept bottles of spiced wine and mead at hand for health and celebration alike. You step back outside and follow the path to the monastery. Monks brew their own mulled wine in a vaulted cellar. You enter and see wooden vats filled with crushed grapes, honey, and herbs. Cinnamon sticks and star anise float on the surface. A monk dips a ladle and pours the fragrant liquid into a clay bowl. He hands you the bowl, and you sip slowly. The taste is deeper than the tavern's version. The monastery wine is fortified with slices of ginger root cloves and a dash of saffron. It carries a faint sweetness balanced by spicy bite. The monk explains that they added saffron to aid digestion and bring color to winter evenings. The drink warms the body and the soul. In the courtyard, you help fetch firewood for the kiln where large pots of spiced mead will boil. You carry logs and watch as a novice stirs a mixture of honey water and crushed juniper over the flame. The brew simmers, and the fragrance drifts across the stones. You taste a drop and feel the resinous juniper mingling with the sweetness of honey. The novice smiles and reminds you that mead cures winter chill and nourishes the body when grain supplies run low. That evening, you join a celebration in the monastery barn. Long tables are set with bowls of mulled wine and flagons of mead. Pilgrims and villagers gather to share stories and break bread. The abbot stands and raises his cup in a blessing. The candles reflect off wooden beams and laughter rings in the rafters. You raise your mug and toast to health, warmth, and the gentle power of spices and honey. As the night deepens, you stroll home through crisp air. Each breath carries the memory of cinnamon cloves and honeyed warmth. You remember how those ancient remedies sustained travelers, monks, and peasants alike. You carry the taste of winter healing on your lips and warmth in your chest. You know that spiced wine and mead are more than festive drinks. They are centuries of wisdom, distilled into cups lifted before hearths, carrying body and spirit through the darkest nights. You wake the next morning with a lingering warmth in your chest and the faint taste of honeyed wine on your tongue. The chill outside your window feels less biting today. You dress quickly and head to the apothecary, where casks of spiced wine and mead line the walls. The apothecary's apprentice greets you and carries a fresh flagon of mulled cider, infused with cinnamon and clove. He pours a steaming measure into a wooden mug and watches as you inhale the fragrance. He explains that cider was a winter staple in orchards where grapes would not grow. It was treated much like wine, spiced and warmed to fortify the body against cold. You taste the cider. It is brisk and fruity, with gentle heat from the spices. You feel your limbs relax. He smiles and says that even the simplest fruit can become powerful medicine when mixed with the right blend of taste and warmth. You leave the apothecary and follow a merchant's caravan to a cluster of wooden houses where the local healer tends to the poor. He uses a mixture of spiced mead and vinegar as a liniment for muscle aches. You watch as he rubs the solution into the pacing limbs of a woodcutter whose back is stiff from cutting logs. The woodcutter groans at first, then halts mid-stride to sample the soothing remedy. He nods, flexes his back, and declares he can work another hour without pain. A child with a cough stands nearby, wrapped in a wool blanket. The healer gives her a small cup of honey wine spiced with ginger and cinnamon. The girl sips and cuddles into her mother's arms. You offer a second cup. She drinks eagerly, eyes wide with surprise at the burning sweetness. The healer tells you that honey wine coats the throat and calms coughs, making it a favorite remedy for winter illnesses in households and monasteries alike. Later, you visit a blacksmith's cottage where the smith's wife complains of chills and fever from the night's draught. You prepare a toddy of mead, heated with crushed peppercorns, and a knob of butter to add richness. The butter dissolves into the mead, forming a slick surface that seals heat inside the mug. You hand the toddy to the wife, who breathes in the peppery steam and sighs with relief. You tie a blanket around her shoulders and light a candle by her bedside. She thanks you with tearful gratitude, saying she feels the blood stirring back to life. In the marketplace, you find an herbalist selling cordials in scented glass flasks. He offers you a cordial distilled from rose hips, hawthorn berries, and lavender. He calls it heart tonic and swears it steadies the pulse. You taste a spoonful and feel a calm center in your chest. The mixture's tart sweetness lingers. You purchase a flask to share with friends who struggle with sleepless nights and restless thoughts. That afternoon, you gather with village elders in the peeling shade of an old elm. Each elder carries a flask of spiced drink. One brings a measure of clove mead, another a cup of ginger wine. You taste each and pass the flasks around. Stories flow as easily as the wine. Elders recall the time when an epidemic swept through and how spiced mead preserved strength in those too weak for solid food. They remember nights of vigil, passing cups to the dying and to those who watched over them. You walk to the shore by a small pond where reeds sway in a gentle breeze. You see fishermen mending nets. They offer to trade freshly caught eels for a flask of mulled wine, claiming the drink's warmth helps them stay at their nets until dawn. You smile and pour them each a small measure. They toast the bond between sea and land, fish and wine. As evening approaches, you gather in the granary where families gather for winter storytelling. The hearth is piled high with logs, and a great pot simmers with spiced wine flavored with honey and orange slices. You help ladle the drink into mugs. Children cluster around the fire, holding mugs in both hands to warm their palms. Parents sit on benches, humming lullabies and sharing tales of saints and heroes who carried flasks of spiced mead on pilgrimages through snowy passes. A minstrel picks up a lute and plucks a tune. The music swirls around the stone walls. You sip your wine and feel the spices tingle at your temples. The combination of music, fire, and mulled drink brings a glow that is more than physical. You feel part of a living tapestry of warmth, health, and celebration. Later that night, you walk home beneath a pale moon. You carry the memory of clove and cinnamon in your thoughts. You feel gratitude for the simple gifts of wine and honey, and the knowledge that even in dark times, people found comfort in shared warmth. At home, you place a flask of spiced cordial on your bedside table. You leave a honey spoon beside it for tomorrow's morning chill. You brush your teeth and slip into bed, pulling blankets tight. You taste the lingering spice on your lips and close your eyes with a sense of wholeness. In the hush before sleep, you recall every face: child, woodcutter, smith's wife, and elders. each warmed by spiced wine and mead. You remember the flicker of torchlight and the hush of night broken only by laughter and the hiss of simmering pots. You understand that spiced wine and mead are more than drinks. They are traditions of healing, carried in mugs and memories through centuries of frost and feast. You drift to sleep, warmed by the thought that in a world without modern comforts, a cup of spiced sweetness could keep body, mind, and spirit alive. You wake before dawn and step into the bakery's cool glow. The stone floor is dusted with flour. A row of wooden peels leans against the wall. Large wicker baskets hold sacks of grain. Today, you will learn how bakers shaped wheat, rye, barley, and even chestnut flours into breads for every occasion. First, you measure white flour from a sack, stamped with the miller's mark. You scoop it into a deep trough of oak and pour in warm water and a pinch of salt. Using your hands, you fold the mixture until it forms sticky dough. The baker sighs with approval. He says that white bread made from finely ground wheat was prized by the wealthy because of its soft texture and pale color. You knead the dough rhythmically, feeling it grow smooth under your palms. When it springs back, you know it is ready. Next, the baker shows you rye bread. Dark and hearty rye flour resists gluten, so the dough is heavier. You mix rye flour with barley malt and a bit of sourdough starter. The starter bubbles as it awakens the grains. You stir until the dough clings thickly to the sides of the trough. The baker sprinkles more rye flour on top. He says that rye bread lasts longer without spoilage and provides warm sustenance in winter. You shape the dough into a round mound and set it to rise beneath a linen cloth. While the breads rest, you help prepare barley loaves. Barley flour is coarser and nutty. You combine barley with wheat in a 2-to-1 ratio so the loaf holds together. You add water and a dash of honey from the monastery bees. The dough is rough and crumbly but becomes more pliable as you knead. The baker forms small round rolls and presses a cross on top with a sharp blade. He explains that barley rolls were common in peasant cottages and often shaped into crosses to ward off evil spirits and bless the meal. Next, you handle chestnut bread. The baker pours chestnut flour into a bowl. It smells sweet and earthy. Chestnut bread was popular where oak nuts were abundant. He adds water and stirs until the chestnut meal forms a thick paste. You find you do not need much kneading. The baker shapes the dough into flat cakes and dusts them with a bit of wheat flour to prevent sticking. These cakes bake quickly on a hot hearthstone and emerge golden with a sweet aroma. The baker cuts one in half for you. The taste is grainy, sweet, and warming like the earth in autumn. With 4 doughs prepared, the baker preheats a large brick oven fueled with oak logs. The inside glows red. He sweeps the hearth clean and places the first loaves directly on the hot stone. He then slides in the rolls, and finally the chestnut cakes. You hear the crusts hiss and crack as steam escapes. You take a step back to avoid the heat. After 20 minutes, the baker uses a long peel to retrieve the breads. The white loaf is pale gold, its crust thin and crisp. The rye loaf is dark brown with deep cracks. The barley rolls are puffy with light brown tops. The chestnut cakes are speckled and slightly domed. The baker sets them to cool on a wooden rack. He invites you to taste each. You slice into the white loaf and find an airy crumb that melts in your mouth. You tear a piece of rye and feel its chewy, dense texture. Its flavor is tangy from the sourdough. The barley roll is soft inside with a crackling crust. The hint of honey makes it sweet. The chestnut cake is hearty and complex. A bite tastes like late summer sunshine and forest paths. The baker explains festival breads next. He combines wheat and rye for spring loaves shaped like flowers. He kneads dough dyed with saffron and beet juice for color. You help roll it into petals and pinched shapes. These loaves will be carried in May processions. He also makes Christmas wreath breads from barley dough woven into circles and studded with dried fruit and nuts. You watch as he braids the dough into wreaths, adding candied orange peel for sparkle. As you finish the festival loaves, the villagers arrive for the midday market. They haggle and trade for your breads. A blacksmith buys a chestnut cake for his family. A weaver picks barley rolls for her children. A noble lady pays for white loaves to serve at her table. You help pack loaves into baskets and hear words of praise for the bakehouse's quality. At the end of the day, you sweep the yard and stow the remaining dough starters in wooden vats. The baker thanks you and invites you to return tomorrow. You leave with a small wheat roll tucked in your cloak pocket. That night, you break the roll at your hearth. You taste warmth and memory. You think of how every grain was chosen and every shape carried meaning. You know that medieval people baked not only for hunger, but for celebration, blessing, and community. You drift to sleep with the taste of fresh bread on your lips and dream of ovens glowing bright. You awaken ready to knead anew, honoring ancient loaves and the simple power of grains transformed by fire and hand. You rise with the dawn and follow the baker's son to the pie house behind the market square. An open hearth crackles with embers, and a long wooden table is dusted with flour. Rough blocks of lard stand beside bowls of wheat flour and jugs of water. Today you will learn the art of medieval meat pies and the sturdy crusts that held them. First, the cook mixes flour and lard in a great wooden trough. He uses his fingertips to rub the fat into the flour until it looks like coarse meal. He then pours in cold water and brings the mixture together into a dough. You knead it just enough to form a smooth ball. He warns not to overwork. The dough or the crust will become tough. You feel the dough yield beneath your palms as you turn and press it gently. Next, you pluck herbs from a pot of winter thyme and a sprig of parsley. You chop them finely and sprinkle them into the dough, pressing them in so every bite of crust will carry their fragrance. The cook places the dough in a cloth and sets it aside to rest. While the dough rests, you prepare the filling. A butcher's apprentice brings trays of venison and pork scraps trimmed from roasts. The meat is coarsely chopped with a heavy blade and placed in a large bowl. You add diced onions from the root cellar, cubes of bacon fat, and a handful of oats to thicken the filling. The cook pours a cup of ale and a splash of vinegar into the bowl, then stirs in chopped sage and a pinch of nutmeg. You taste a spoonful and feel the rich blend of meat grains and spice. The cook lifts the rested dough and divides it into 2 large rounds. He rolls the first piece into a thin circle on a floured board. You sprinkle the edge with flour and gently lift the pastry into a deep pie dish made of stamped tin. The crust covers the bottom and sides, the edge fluting with a fork. You fill the crust with the meat mixture until it mounds slightly. The cook rolls out the second round and gently lays it on top, sealing the edges with a damp finger. He trims away excess pastry and uses a knife to cut a few small vents to let steam escape. Then the cook teaches you the medieval method of flipping the pie. He covers the top with a clean cloth, holds the dish firmly, and turns it upside down onto a heated iron griddle. The pie lands with a soft thud, pastry side down. The dish is lifted away, leaving the crust golden underneath and the meaty filling hidden. This coffin-style release reveals a savory mound bound by crisp crust. You watch as the cook returns the pie to the hearth, crust side up. The aroma of meat and ale mingles with the rich golden pastry. You press a thumb into the edge to test doneness. The crust breaks with a gentle crack but holds firm. He slides the pie onto a wooden plank and invites you to cut a slice. You use a short knife to sever a wedge and lift it onto a plate. Steam rises in soft waves. You taste the meat and broth soaked into the pastry. The crust is buttery and firm, the filling tender and spiced. You nod in delight. Next, the cook shows you hand pies for travelers. He rolls small discs of dough and lays a spoonful of filling in the center. He folds the pastry over the meat and pinches the edges into a tight seam. He pokes holes with a flame-heated pin to vent steam and sets the hand pies on a rack above the hearth. These pies will travel far. Their sturdy shells keep the filling inside and warm for hours. You help pack a basket of 10 for a caravan that rests beyond the city walls. A group of villagers gathers to taste the pies. A shepherd takes a bite of the big griddle pie and says he tastes the forest in the venison and oats. A farmer praises the sturdy crust that holds every drop of gravy. A merchant compliments the hint of spice and the tender onions. You stand by the hearth and feel pride in this simple art of enclosing flavor within golden pastry. As midday sun warms the air, you prepare festival pies. You roll dough with saffron strands for color and scent. You shape the dough into fluted crowns and nest chunks of rabbit boiled in wine at the center. You glaze the edges with egg and press small mushrooms around the filling. These pies will be carried to the May Day feast in the meadow beyond the abbey. You load them into baskets lined with cloth and watch as young girls carry them off with laughter. In the afternoon, you return to the hearth to bake a sweet pie of apples and quince. You roll crust again and drill decorative holes in the top. The apples cook in honey and cinnamon until tender. The steam presses through the crust vents and fills the room with warm spices. You taste a spoonful of the filling and feel the cool sweetness of fruit warmed by honey. As dusk falls, you help clear the hearth and sweep away scraps of pastry. You hang your apron and wipe flour from your hands. The cook thanks you for your eager help. He says that medieval bakers turned daily bread into art and flavor, giving communities feasts to remember. You step outside into the cool evening air and hear the echo of peasants singing as they gather herbs for tomorrow's stew. You feel the crispness of autumn in your nostrils and the memory of pastry beneath your teeth. At home, you slice a wedge of leftover meat pie and warm it by your hearth. You taste layers of crust and filling, each bite a reminder of days spent learning from ancient recipes and skilled hands. You drink a cup of spiced ale and close your eyes in contentment. That night, you dream of ovens piled with pies of every shape and size. You hear the crackle of crusts and taste the hint of herbs in every bite. You wake ready to roll dough once more and fill it with the rich bounty of land and field. You carry forward the legacy of medieval bakers who knew that no feast was complete without the golden crown of pastry and the savory magic it held within. You wake to the scent of simmering honey and spice drifting through the morning air. The baker's apprentice leads you to a low table where jars of golden honey and mounds of crystalline sugar await. Bowls hold sticks of cinnamon, wedges of ginger root, and bundles of cloves tied with string. A basket contains saffron threads like tiny strands of sunrise. This is the heart of medieval sweetness, where flavor and status meet in every spoonful. The master confectioner begins by demonstrating how honey was the first sweetener. He dips a wooden spoon into a pot of honey drawn from monastic hives and tastes it. The flavor is rich and floral. He explains that honey was prized not only for its sweetness, but for its healing properties. People believed it cured infections, soothed coughs, and fortified the blood. Its keeping qualities made it perfect for brewing mead and preserving fruits in winter. You help him measure honey into a broad copper pan. He sets it over a low fire of oak boughs and stirs gently until the surface quivers. Next, he sprinkles in fresh ginger slices. The root sizzles as it hits the liquid. You smell the warm, spicy aroma swirl around you. The confectioner adds turmeric for color and a handful of cinnamon sticks broken into pieces. The spices steep in the honey, tinting it amber and infusing it with complex fragrance. He scoops the mixture into small bowls and invites you to taste. A spoonful brings warmth to your chest and a flicker on your tongue that lingers long after you swallow. Next, you move to crystalline sugar. Cane sugar was a rare import from southern lands. You lift each grain between your fingers and marvel at its sharp sweetness. The confectioner explains that sugar was sometimes used to mask the flavor of bitter medicines. A pinch of sugar could turn an herbal decoction into a palatable cure. You help stir sugar into a pot of rosewater until it dissolves in gentle currents of pink. He pours the syrup into glass vials for apothecaries. You cork each vial and label it with ink and parchment. This rose syrup will be taken for thirst and melancholy. Across the room you see large trays of candied ginger. The confectioner teaches you to melt sugar over the flame and stir in sliced ginger until each piece is coated in a glossy shell. You spread the candies on a linen cloth to cool. The ginger's heat shines through sugar's protective glaze. You taste one and feel the sharp bite soften to sweet warmth. Ginger candy was believed to aid digestion, prevent nausea, and drive out chills. Travelers carried pieces in pouches to settle stomachs on rocky roads and stormy seas. Now you move to the spice chest. You lift fragrant sticks of cinnamon and taste their spicy sweetness. You grind them by hand in a mortar and then dust the powder into a bowl of sugar mixed with a bit of ground nutmeg. You mix thoroughly until every grain sparkles with seasoning. The confectioner dips plain sugar dough rounds into the spiced mixture. Each cookie emerges, dusted in brown and speckled with the warm scents of festive fare. You help arrange them in stacks and tie them with ribbons. A visiting merchant from a distant city enters and offers bags of mace and cardamom in exchange for your sugar confections. He explains that rich households prize imported spices as symbols of wealth and refinement. You taste a sliver of mace and feel its pungent floral aroma open your senses. Cardamom seeds, rolled between your teeth, release a surprising citrus note. You understand how medieval kitchens blended these spices with sugar to create confections that spoke of distant shores and exotic lands. In the courtyard, you help monks press pomegranate seeds into a chilled honey syrup spiced with cinnamon and cloves. Then you press the seeds into a shallow pan and let them set. The ruby jewels glisten in the morning light. You taste one and feel the burst of tart juice coated in honey's sweetness and the whisper of spice. This jewel sweet was offered to pilgrims at the monastery gate, a promise of paradise captured in a bite. Later you gather in the great hall for festival baking. Tables are laden with fruitcakes, dried fruit sweetened with sugar and enriched with ginger and cinnamon. You help knead rich dough heavy with butter, sugar, and currants. The cook folds in almond paste and shapes the cakes into loaves and rounds. You watch as he scores the tops with crosses and stars. These festive loaves will be shared at weddings, feasts, and holy days. Each bite is a declaration of abundance and joy. In the afternoon, a group of children arrives carrying wicker baskets. They fill them with leftover cookies, candied fennel seeds, and sticky pieces of caramelized honeycomb. The master confectioner lets each child pick a treat. You hand out pieces with care, smiling at their wide eyes and sticky fingers. They skip away, giggling, their pouches jingling with sweet treasure. As evening falls, you help prepare a final remedy. You combine vinegar, honey, and ground ginger into a thick cordial. You pour it into small cups and hand them to weary travelers who stop at the tavern by the city gate. They sip slowly and feel warmth spread through chilled bones. You know this cordial will drive out the damp of long roads and give rest to those who drink deeply. Back in the kitchen, you clean the pans and sweep the sugar dust from the floor. You hang linen cloths to dry and extinguish the last candle. You dampen the hearth embers and lock up the spice jars. The master confectioner pats you on the shoulder and thanks you for your help. He says that sugar and spice brought more than flavor. They brought comfort, health, and the promise of home across every table. You step outside into the quiet night. The air is crisp and carries the faint scent of cinnamon on the breeze. You taste the memory of sweetness on your tongue and feel gratitude for the curious treats that once defined status and healing alike. That night you drift to sleep, dreaming of jars of golden honey crystallizing, of sugar spun into twists of amber, of spices dancing in simmering pots. You dream of the hands that turn sugar and spice into solace. You wake ready to taste once more the ancient alchemy that turns sting and heat into warmth and healing. You rise at first light and step into the dew-spangled meadow where wild herbs flourish. The air is cool and fresh, the sky pale with dawn's promise. You carry a wicker basket and a small knife for cutting roots. Your companion, a seasoned forager, greets you with a nod and leads you along a worn deer path into the edge of the forest. In a sunlit clearing, you spot nettles growing tall and green. The forager plucks a pair of sturdy gloves from his belt and slips them on. He shows you how to grasp the stalk just below the leaves and snap it clean. The nettles hiss as they are cut, their fine hairs releasing a pungent scent. You drop the stalks into your basket. Nettles are prized for their mineral richness. You will dry them for tea to ease joint pain and boost the blood with iron and vitamins. Deeper into the woods, you find a patch of common dock. The broad leaves stand between nettles and other herbs, a natural remedy for nettle stings. You gather dock leaves carefully, knowing they will soothe skin when rubbed fresh on irritated flesh. The forager shouts a warning as you brush against a hidden tangle of wild onions. The green shoots smell of garlic when bruised. You pull several bulbs from the earth and shake off the soil. Wild onions add sharp flavor to stews and carry antiseptic qualities. You press on until the forest floor softens into moss. There you discover a cluster of chanterelle mushrooms, golden cups rising from decaying leaves. The forager shows you how to examine the cap and stem to ensure it is not a poisonous lookalike. You cut the chanterelles at soil level with your knife and place them gently in a cloth bag to keep them from bruising. Chanterelles will be sautéed in butter and served at the next feast. Their rich aroma and creamy texture elevate simple meals into celebrations of forest bounty. A little farther, you find a stand of dandelions. Their bright yellow petals gleam like sunbeams. You pluck the entire plant root stem leaves and flour for full plant tinctures. The roots will be cleaned and dried for coffee substitutes, while the petals steep in wine or honey for digestive bitters. Dandelions are bitter, but that bitterness drives out toxins from the liver and eases digestion after heavy feasts. You tuck each whole plant into your basket. Beneath a fallen oak, you uncover sneezewort and yarrow. Their feathery leaves and tiny clusters of flowers promise healing for wounds. You cut stems and gather them in a linen cloth. Later, these herbs will be crushed into poultices to staunch bleeding and prevent infection. Their astringent powers were known to plague doctors and battlefield surgeons alike. You sense the cool shade of the oak and rest against its trunk, tasting the forest's hush. Moving into a sunlit glade, you find elderberry bushes heavy with dark purple fruit. The forager shows you how to pinch clusters gently and let the ripe berries fall into your hand. You handle them carefully to avoid staining your fingers too deeply. Elderberries will be boiled into syrup to fight fevers and soothe coughs. Their rich color and potent antioxidants have been praised by healers for generations. You fill a small wooden bowl and marvel at each tiny orb. At the path's edge, the forager points to marshmallow plants growing in damp soil. Their heart-shaped leaves and tall flower spikes stand out among reeds. He digs a root and hands it to you. Marshmallow root will be sliced and dried for soothing throat lozenges and salves to calm inflamed skin. You wash the root and slip it into your pack. You pause for midday bread baked from barley flour. You break off a chunk and spread fresh nettle pesto made from this morning's harvest. The pesto carries the sting of nettles, then softens to herbaceous warmth. You dip mushrooms and onions into the stew of roots and race wild garlic broth. Each flavor blends into a symphony of countryside taste. Refreshed, you continue foraging. You find sorrel with its tart, arrow-shaped leaves. Sorrel will bring a lemony brightness to soups and sauces. You pull several leaves and let the sharp tang fill your senses. Near a trickling brook, you discover watercress growing in clear current. You pluck a handful of delicate sprigs. Watercress will be eaten fresh in salads or steeped into broths for cough relief. and blood purification. You taste a raw sprig and feel its peppery bite invigorate your tongue. As afternoon light filters through the canopy, you make your final harvest. Buried chanterelle buttons of truffle hidden in moss. The forager kneels and senses their perfume in the earth. He brushes soil away with care and reveals small discs of black truffle. These rare gems will be shaved sparingly over dishes for a scent that calls the wild home. You marvel at their pungent aroma and lay them in a wooden crate lined with ferns. With baskets full, you retrace your steps out of the forest. You marvel at how nettles and docks, onions and mushrooms, roots and berries all stand ready to feed and heal. You share the bounty with your neighbor who brews nettle tea and dries elderberries for syrup. You watch as sorrel brightens his soup and marshmallow lozenges soothe sore throats along the way. Returning home, you unload each harvest onto a wooden table. You see the colors of the land reflected in green herbs, golden mushrooms, and purple berries. You think of how medieval people relied on these wild foods when gardens failed or grain ran low. They lived by the land's generosity and honored it in soups, stews, and salves. That night, you stagger through a feast of wild mushrooms, porridge of barley, and nettle stew. You taste elderberry syrup with spiced wine. You feel gratitude for the wild and the knowledge carried down by generations of foragers. You drift to sleep, dreaming of days spent gleaning the earth's gifts and turning them into meals that heal. You wake, resolved to wander the woods again, basket in hand, following the ancient path that leads from forest floor to healing hearth. You awake before dawn on the first day of Lent and find the world hushed beneath pale morning light. In the village, shutters remain closed and hearth fires burn low. Today begins 40 days of fasting. No meat, no dairy, no eggs. The only foods allowed are fish, vegetables, pulses, and bread. You rise and dress in simple linen, leaving behind the scented spices and rich meats of last night's feast. Today the table is spare. You join the village priest in the chapel for a brief service. He speaks of sacrifice, repentance, and renewal. You kneel on cold stone floors and bow your head. You sense the weight of centuries of believers who began this season in the same way, ready to empty themselves of indulgence and fill themselves with faith. After the service, you return to the kitchen where a large pot of fish broth simmers over embers. You stir gently, watching flecks of white from cod and monkfish drift in the golden liquid. The cook adds handfuls of chopped leeks, carrots, and turnips. He seasons only with salt and a sprig of parsley. You ladle the thin stew into wooden bowls and pass them out to villagers gathered in the hall. Each person holds their bowl reverently, mindful that today's sustenance is simple and pure. Over the next weeks, you adjust to fasting foods. Each morning you eat barley pottage flavored with nettles or cabbage leaves. You sip a weak cup of herbal tea made from dried mint or chamomile. At midday, you share fish cakes made from minced herring mixed with wild onion and a little flour, fried in vegetable oil. Each bite reminds you that even without meat, the body can find strength. In the afternoons, you gather with women to bake unleavened Lenten biscuits. The dough is made from water flour and oil only. You roll it thin, cut shapes with a wooden stamp, and bake them on a heated stone. The biscuits are bland yet satisfying. You share them with neighbors walking home from the fields. You remind each other that the fast is not only abstaining from pleasure, but growing in discipline. On Fridays, you eat nothing until sunset. After Vespers, you break the fast with a small piece of salted fish and a handful of olives. The briny flavor brings tears to your eyes and warmth to your belly. You reflect on the hunger of so many and pray for those who truly lack even these simple foods. As the weeks pass, you find comfort in vegetarian dishes. The cook stews dried beans with onions and crushed garlic, simmering them until thick. You mash some for creamy texture and leave whole beans for broth. You top each bowl with chopped parsley and a drizzle of olive oil. The hearty fare sustains you through days of prayer and work. Then comes Palm Sunday. The chapel fills with greenery as worshippers carry palm fronds. You celebrate the end of daily fast and the promise of Easter feasting. But the fast continues until Easter itself. You return home with fronds pressed into your prayer book and hope pressed into your heart. At last, the great vigil of Easter arrives. After a long service, you gather beneath stars with bowls of blessed water. The cook begins a grand Lenten feast. First comes fish eggs, salted and cured in jars of brine, served on thin slices of rye bread. You taste the pearls of roe, each bursting with sea flavor. Next comes a soft cheese made from goat's milk, seasoned with fennel and dill. The cheese is smooth and fragrant. You thank the shepherds who cared for the goats through winter. Then the cook brings roasted vegetables, carrots, parsnips and beetroot, glazed with honey, and wild mushrooms fried in butter and garlic. You pass bowls of spinach stewed with onions and a little wine. Each dish speaks of new life after winter's austerity. You raise a cup of sweet wine to celebrate resurrection and renewal. The centerpiece arrives, a grand pie filled with venison and game birds, quail and pheasant, baked in rich pastry. You cut a wedge of the pie and taste the spiced meat beneath golden crust. It is rich and joyous, a stark contrast to the simple stews of Lent. You savor each bite, mindful of the months of abstinence that make this banquet sweeter. For dessert, you share pomegranate seed jelly and rose petal jam on small cakes. You drink mead infused with saffron and mint, the honey warming your chest. The hall bursts with laughter, song, and stories. You feel the warmth of community and faith renewed. By the end of the feast, you are full in body and spirit. The fast is broken. You have endured days of humility and emerged grateful for abundance. You remember the strength found in barley pottage and fish broth. You honor the discipline that prepared you for joy. You reflect on how abstinence taught you compassion for those who hunger daily. That night you return home beneath a sky lit by candles and Easter fires. You rest by your hearth, content and hopeful. You know that the cycle of fasting and feasting binds seasons and souls alike. You close your eyes, thankful for every humble bite and grand celebration that marks the journey of life. You sit at your modern table, staring at a simple plate of sandwich and salad, knowing deep down you would never thrive on medieval fare. Imagine a world where every meal carried risk and every feast demanded courage. Your turkey sandwich feels tame compared to the cavalcade of flavors that once defined dining. You would not survive these meals. Not the bloodletting pottage, nor the exotic peacock presentations, nor the hair-raising offal feasts. First, consider the staple pottage. Peasant families ate little else for breakfast, dinner, and supper. A single pot of grains and greens reused all day. You would cringe at its grey, mushy texture and endless repeat. You might develop an iron stomach faster than anything, but you would resent every spoonful by the second day. The absence of variety and the perpetual scraping of the pot would grind you down. You would beg for spice or salt or bread crust to pretend you were eating something new. Then imagine offal feasts. Liver, kidneys, tongue, and heart were prized delicacies, seasoned with strong herbs and wine. You might choke at the concept of eating your own leftovers. The first time you tasted pan-fried kidney, you would gag at its rubbery bounce. You might endure the first bite out of bravado, but the next one would lodge in your throat. The notion that organ meats were the height of culinary skill would seem absurd. My modern palate craves lean briskets and fillets, not the life's work of a butcher's every tool. Movement on to peacock, swan, and heron pies. The grand reveal of pristine flesh beneath golden pastry would thrill momentarily. Yet once you tasted baked peacock, you would question everything you thought you knew about poultry. The faint gaminess and dryness would leave you lamenting modern chicken. You would marvel at the spectacle, but never ask for a second slice. Even the impressively arranged tail would become dusty overhead as the taste faded. Consider the smoky dance of spiced meats and preserved fish. Salted herring and smoked salmon sustained travelers and nobles alike. You relish smoked salmon on a bagel now, but smoked monkfish herring would sting your tongue. You would find yourself scraping salty brine off each fillet. The hearty venison jerky might last longer than your will. You would abandon barrels of salted meats for fresh roast. In your kitchen, you might attempt leech therapy or dung poultices. You would balk at millet-sized worms clinging to veins. You cannot imagine circling sores with foul-smelling dung. The medieval reliance on living creatures and filth as medicine would shock your clean standards. You might endure one blistering session for the story, but the next morning you would race to a modern doctor. When you heard of trepanning, drilling into skulls to release spirits, you would laugh at superstitions, but fear the pain. No anesthesia in sight, your modern self would pass out at the mere thought of an all-tapping bone. You would wake bound to a table with a hole in your head and swear never again. The herbal elixirs and flower confections might entice you briefly. Rose, jam, violet candies, pomegranate jellies, spiced honey, all taste lovely. But you would tire of spooning sugared petals and turnip-candied roots. You would reach for plain chocolate or coffee instead of rosewater cordial. You have room for spiced wine and mead remedies. You sample mulled wine with cinnamon and cloves at holiday markets. You savor ginger honey mead, yet weeks of toddies and cordials would wear you down. You would crave water at dawn. Your liver would file a formal complaint. When you learned of London's medieval quarantine and pest houses, you would shiver at disinfecting with vinegar and juniper. You would avoid those stench-filled huts and bring disinfectant wipes. You would click your heels, and telephone sirens would rise to rescue you. In the mix of sacred relics, holy wells and pilgrimage cures, you might kneel at a shrine. You might sample blessed water, or sip monk-blessed oil. But the ritual of travel, grazing on alms, bread, and sleeping on straw would tire you. You would long for a bed and hot shower. Pottage of barley and nettles would test your fortitude. Gruel for breakfast. You would revolt. You would soak your Pop-Tarts in cold milk and declare yourself the last of the resilient souls. Offal pies of brain and heart sheathed in pastry might tempt your Instagram feed. Yet, you would scroll past the culinary photos, longing for avocado toast. In Lenten feasts, you might observe the fast days and break with fish and eggs only on Sundays. You would survive fasting but curse the bland barley biscuits. You would reach for pizza the moment Lent ended. Bread varieties of barley, chestnut, and rye taught medieval cooks to coax flavor from flours. Yet you find rye too heavy and chestnut too sweet. You bake sourdough and brush it with olive oil instead. Spiced meats and preserved fish carried peasant families year-round. You would store your freezer with salmon fillets and vacuum seal it. You would skip the fish barrels on wheels. Exotic birds baked in pastry dazzled medieval eyes. They dazzled yours on History Channel. You would admire, but not sample. You like your Thanksgiving turkey unadorned. Creature cures of spiders, leeches, and frogs sound quaint in a museum video. You would shut the screen. You require modern lab coats and sterile gloves. Mummy powder and bone dust sound macabre. You would appreciate its fancy names but demand a certificate of testing. Donkey dung poultices would end your day. You would exclaim no thank you and apply a modern antibiotic cream. Medieval spice stews and pastries would fill your pastry shop's display window as a curiosity, not the daily menu. You would enjoy one taste for novelty, then return to your latte. Your stomach and senses developed with electric heat ovens and freezers. You expect flavorful reheating and fresh produce. You would not huddle over open flames stirring murky stews. Medieval people knew their land, their seasons, their limits. Each eccentric recipe carried hope and resourcefulness. You respect that. Yet your modern journey travels a soft road, paved by science and convenience. You would never muster the grit to feast on peacock, or seal your skull with awls or lick dung dust off a poultice. So you sit at your table of supple cheese, ripe fruits, crisp salad, and sip a spiced latte. You think of the 1,000-year-old feasts that filled church halls and castle kitchens. You raise a glass of wine and honor those hardy souls who survived medieval medicine, meals, and miracles. You know you would never last a day. You would adapt for one taste, then crave what you have now. And you are grateful for every modern bite,